Um, it looks like a lot more people are joining also as Angie. For those of you seeing Angie as at the bottom of your screen as your name, um, if you want to either, there's a way to change it, but you can also just type your name into the chat and introduce yourself so we know who's here. The plan is to circulate the slides to anybody who's here and anybody who signed up. So uh, we'll just be trying to get everybody's info. Hi, Sam. Okay, well, maybe we can get started. I think we also talked about recording this. So I'm going to go ahead and start a recording.
Recording in
and we can
progress.
circulate that as well. Okay. So hello everybody. Welcome. It's good to see so many people here. We're going to talk today about some of the data that's disappearing from federal databases and repositories and stuff that I think a lot of us in our work have relied on in the past, but are now seeing some big changes. Just to start with some introductions, my name is Brigid. I'm a research and instruction librarian for the Math and Natural Sciences departments, and I also look at emerging technologies as part of my job.
And I'm Shannon Merillat, and I'm also a research and instruction librarian, and my specialties are social sciences and data literacy efforts. Luann, do you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Luann Trevere, the Digital Initiatives and Scholarly Communication Librarian, and I'll pass it to Catherine.
Hi, everyone. Catherine Fish, she, her pronouns. I'm the Serials and E-Resources Librarian, and I'll be trying to keep an eye on the chat today, so feel free to put questions in there throughout as they come to you.
Yeah, so we're gonna if any questions come up during the course of the presentation, please feel free to put them in the chat and Catherine will keep an eye on that. But we're hoping for a large chunk of time at the end of the session to be for questions and conversations and some feedback. So that's kind of how we're generally going to structure this. Pass it to Shannon.
Yeah, so welcome everybody. Talk a little bit about what we're going to cover today. So we'll cover information, general resources. We'll cover briefly some of the executive orders and resulting actions and effects on the public government data and websites and associated tools. And then we'll talk about some of the resources that we've pulled together, and we've housed those in a couple different places, our research guide and OpenSea's blog, and we'll show you that. There's a lot of good stuff out there, which is really encouraging. We'll highlight some subject areas that we know a lot of faculty use data from, but again, we're hoping for like 30 minutes for a discussion at the end here. If there's something that we missed that you're really concerned about, because this obviously isn't exhaustive, definitely let us know. And then we'll also talk about what you can do. So how you can make sure that your research data is still available. And if you're interested in participating in data recovery archiving projects, we have some information on how you can get involved.
So just to start with some broad conversation about what's happening, we're looking at as sort of like three major things. So there's been a lot of data removal. There's data sets being removed, and some of the particular areas being targeted are the ones that Shannon just mentioned. But so far, I think this information is as of February, but over 8,000 web pages and approximately 3,000 data sets have been removed. Today we're going to focus mostly on data sets, but it also bleeds into some like scholarship and website stuff. But we're primarily focusing on data sets for today. And yeah, some of the areas that we've seen really highly targeted are environment, public health, education, and census data are kind of the big ones we're seeing. There's also been some alteration to some existing data sets. So we've seen a couple web pages or data sets go offline and then be put back up, sometimes with code books removed altogether, which, you know, makes researching and interpreting the data sets more difficult, if not impossible in some cases. And we've also seen a lot of terminology changes. So some terms have been just like replaced across government websites. Climate change is getting replaced with climate resilience, LGBTQ getting replaced with LGB. Another one is pregnant people gets replaced with pregnant women. So this is not an exhaustive list, but they're just a few examples of information we're seeing change. And then there's funding cuts, which so far have not been the cause of any, or the direct cause of any removals of data sets from government websites. But it does raise a lot of questions about like how databases will be maintained in the future, and who will keep collecting data and making sure that it remains publicly available. Some of the big departments we've been keeping an eye on are Department of Health and Human Services, NIH, CDC, FDA, Department of Education is a huge one. I think we all are familiar with that one. The National Center for Education Statistics is a big one. They have gone from 100 staff to 3 staff, and their head statistician is retiring early, so they're seeing some really major cuts there. And the Institute for Museum and Library Sciences is also seeing some funding cuts. So in terms of, well, and this stuff is very much ongoing. Dave sent this photo of an article this morning. There's just like constantly new information popping up. I think a lot of folks might have heard the term like flood the zone is what's happening, where they just like have this deluge of activity and it makes it really hard to keep track of what's going on. But we're doing our best to track what data sets are being removed. So trying to stay up to date on the relevant legislation, what's disappearing, and looking at the like who's restoring data sets and where can we continue finding them. We're looking at like some temporary restraining orders and seeing how that affects either the slow or reversible of some of these removals. We're in conversation with a lot of colleagues at other institutions and seeing what's going on with them. So that's been a big thing for us lately. We also have been trying to compile resources. So our disappearing data LibGuide is one resource that we'll be pointing to a lot. This is what it looks like. It's under all guides on our LibGuides page, and we'll send out a link. But we're actively maintaining and updating this as much as we can as new information becomes available. So this is kind of going to be like our central resource for finding alternative sources or archived sources of data. And then our Open Seas blog is where we talk about like scholarship equity and access. So that'll be kind of an ongoing conversation there probably, but we have one post so far that's kind of compiles some information and actions. And we're also really hoping to gather some feedback in this source and continuously. So please talk to us if you have any data sets that you use that have been removed or you've had changes in access to. We really want to know what's important to you and your students. We're approaching this from our information science perspective, but we know that like faculty and staff have their own expertise areas and things that they rely on. So we'd love to hear what's going on with you and kind of where you're at with a lot of this stuff. And I'll pass it off to Shannon to talk about public health.
Great. Thanks, Brigid. So you guys have probably picked up at least some of this just from the news, but Some of the topics targeted, big one is gender identity and LGBTQ plus. But then other ones too have been HIV and reproductive health, and we've seen immunization data and websites and substance abuse targeted as well. And that is just a selection. There's others as well, I believe, cancer and some others too. So what is happening? So the January 20th, there was a defending woman order to terminate any programs and remove any outward-facing media, documents, materials, communications, and statements that promote gender ideology, which in effect is preventing the collection of information and data on gender identity, which has some, really terrible effects for that population and for everybody, honestly. 143 data sets and files have been removed. There have been several that, as a result of restraining orders, have been put back. So I don't know if that 143 that was from a Stat News tracker reflects the number that have been put back up, or if it's 143 that are still missing. But that's a lot, and it's concerning either way. January 29th, there was a memo from the OPM on ending funding for gender ideology, and that was kind of what instigated that CDC website and data going down. For the CDC website was completely down for a brief period of time, and then the data, a lot of the data was just unavailable for a longer period of time. Doctors, there was a restraining order put forth from Doctors for America. It's temporary, so it could be that this data will go away again, but it was to restore web pages data sets that were targeted, including the behavioral risk factor surveillance system, youth risk behavior surveillance system, and the social vulnerability index. And then I believe some other tools related to HIV and reproductive health. But some of the things that they anything that they didn't specifically name in that restraining order was not put back up. So it was really just what they need. Like there was some information on monkeypox that never went back up because it just wasn't mentioned in that restraining order. CDC also stopped processing transgender related data on the 26th of February. And then looking forward to a lot of grants, you guys might have heard about the indirect rate. The NIH grants have been terminated for having targeted keywords included in them that are around gender identity and LGBTQ. So downstream, like that's going to affect the availability of data if those studies are not able to be completed that normally would. The FDA also removed about 100 pages, including dozens of regulatory guidelines on topics about increasing diversity in clinical trials and potential for addiction and abuse in drug studies. So that was a big deal. There was also an outage of PubMed, which to my knowledge has never happened before, at least for this long. It was from March 1st to 2nd. It's reported that was not like that was just an accident. But that's really highlighted the dependence of researchers and physicians and the public on PubMed. Like there's really no resource like it. There's a European version of PubMed, but it's really not the same. The indexing ability makes it so that you can identify high quality studies really, really easily. There's just nothing else like it. So I think people are now taking a look at investing in some alternatives should something happen, because PubMed is housed in National Library of Medicine and NIH. So it certainly is vulnerable. So some things that are impacted, it's not just the data, but the tools in the code book. So while some of the data sets could be available, they might have been altered. And also, like, if the code books are not available, because we're finding even if some of the data has been put back, the code books and the manuals and data dictionaries aren't there. And so it's kind of unusable if you don't have that information. A couple of the really big data sets that were taken down initially and brought back because of that restraining order were the behavioral risk factor surveillance system and the youth risk behavioral surveillance system. And those are really, really important. The youth risk behavior system, it tracks metrics on nutrition, physical activity, tobacco, sexual behavior, other areas. It's been going on for 35 years, and it's a national level survey. And researchers rely on this to look at how behaviors influence health, and they design prevention measures, and they design community and school programs. This is a really, really important data set. So that's just some highlights in the world of health. Then Brigid, I'll turn it over to you for environment.
Yeah, so there's also been a lot of targeting of environmental data. They have sort of disproportionately affected the Department of Energy, NOAA, the Department of the Interior, NASA, and the EPA. So we've been looking for alternatives and opportunities to archive that data. A really big resource in this area is the Public Environmental Data Project. They have a lot of great resources where they've indexed different archives and data rescue events related to environmental data. So they've been backing up a lot of stuff. The climate and economic justice screening tool was a really big one that got taken down. It's a lot of like geospatial data, but they have been able to prop up a mirrored copy of it. So there's still like a usable copy of it. Something that has been really prominent in the sort of like initiatives to remove data has been NOAA data and like weather data. There's been talk of eliminating the National Weather Service. And there's been suspension of some really important forecasting information. And that one is sort of a uniquely difficult one to tackle because weather data, there's just like such massive amounts of it and it's collected on a continual basis. So that's a really challenging area, but people are working to try to archive as much as that they can. And some of the agencies that are facing further cuts include the NSF, NASA, USGS. And those, we may see in the future that they struggle to maintain their databases or their websites. And again, some of that terminology changes, like from climate change to climate resilience, can sort of obscure your ability to find some of this information. So that could likely call into question the integrity of some of the existing data when it's been altered like this. But there are also alternatives to some of these government data sites. The Public Environmental Data Project has a lot of stuff. And the Environmental Data and Governance Initiative has a lot of resources on their website. And I'll just also take this opportunity to show that we have on our LibGuide, we sort of have like an overview of what's going on and how to stay informed and stuff. But when you're looking for data, we have this Finding Data tab. And you can go over here and say you want to look at environmental data and the archives of it. You can click on this link and they've got a bunch of updates on rescue projects. And then if you're looking for alternative sources, you can go down here and look. This is a LibGuide that's still in progress. So we're working on compiling more information as it becomes available. But we also have some links to some other LibGuides. A really helpful one is this University of Minnesota one about finding government information. They have a lot of really extensive links that are organized really well. So as we work on ours, please, if there's anything that you find really helpful and it's not reflected in our resources, please let us know. Or if there's any like feedback you have, please get in touch. Back to Shannon.
Thanks. Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about some of the census data and education data. So the Census Bureau, they haven't really made a public statement about what's going on. There are reports that the employees could not access an internal platform for sharing files and information over multiple days, which is a significant setback in the preparing for the 2030 census. There's actually a lot of concerns about the 2030 census. Some of the field tests, there's concerns they might be canceled, and those are just like paramount in order to ensure that they are able to collect a representative sample. Also, with these kinds of things going on, it's already, things have happened that have eroded the public's trust in the census, and it's really important that they have trust to get that like sample size, and so they can get that really rich demographic data. In fact, like the data that the US has, not just in the census data, but in the health data on race and ethnicity, it's probably better than a lot of other like data from other countries. Even they just don't collect that kind of data in a lot of other European countries. Perhaps there are some countries that do collect it, but it's really great. And so it would be a shame, to say the least, if we lost it. So sample size is becoming an issue. The integrity of the future data is at risk, especially if there are further layoffs. And a recent American Statistical Association report did cite, I think before the Trump administration, that there was declining participation and insufficient laws to protect data integrity from political interference. So these are really big issues now. I don't have it on this slide, but there are some alternate sources, I would say, and those are in our research guide. My favorite one is IPMS. There's a US Census data that they have been collecting and curating on there, and there are other sources as well. So as far as education goes, we're all aware of the cuts to the Department of Education, but there's been some really serious cuts to the research arm, the Institute of Education Science, and especially to the National Center for Education Statistics. Like their staff was recently cut from 100 to 3 employees, which is just wild. In addition, 100 employees actually, like for the work that they do the nation's report card, they do really like all of the measurements of all of the surveys involving education. It's a lot. They have a lot of contracts, and I believe about 90% of their contracts were canceled to some of them related to ideologically driven spending, so DEI, LGBTQ related. So they have said that the nation's report card won't be affected, but that seems a little difficult to believe with all of the cuts. Also, there's a really good resource. This isn't currently in the research guide, but we can definitely put it there. A lot of professional societies are doing a lot of really great work, advocacy work, and have a lot of great updates on their websites too. And they have mentioned that all of the restricted use NCES data licenses are going to be canceled on March 20th. So if that's something that you use, you definitely need to make arrangements, which is really sad. So that's what's going on in education. Alternate source, the big one for that is Data Lumos, and that's from ICPSR, and we have a link to that repository on our research guide.
Speaking of our research guide, we have some information about some actions you can be taking to preserve and archive your own research and maintain public access if that's something you're interested in doing, and also some information about participating in some of these data rescue efforts. So back to our research guide, we have this tab, What You Can Do. And self-archiving and depositing your research is something that you might consider doing at this time. So if you're thinking about like preserving access for yourself or for the public, you can back it up in an open access repository. Dryad is one that we have membership with. So Macalester authors don't pay submission fees through the end of this year. Luann and Catherine are really great people to talk to if you have any questions about depositing or publishing your data. There's also the Open Science Framework, which has, it's an open source cloud-based like project management tool, and they promote open and centralized workflows. So if you're working with other folks, this is a really great resource. And they also have published a bunch of different like workflows, and they have some really great resources and information for how to do some of this work. We also have a link to this checklist from MIT that outlines some steps you can take to make sure that the data you use remains available to yourself and others. And so they have this really great like step-by-step checklist about identifying data, confirming its availability, and how to make backups. I will also say that there's a lot of projects going on right now with this. Some of them involve like using FTP servers. This can sometimes create security risks, so definitely be like cognizant of where you're pulling data and downloading it. And if you have any questions or concerns, you can reach out to your academic technologist or to the library for connection with support on some of this like more IT stuff. There's also some other things you can be doing. MuckRock is a journalism organization that's submitting FOIA requests for data sets. So if there's one that you're interested in seeing preserved, they have this FOIA request form to make some suggestions for them to then go through with this Freedom of Information Act request, and they'll try to get that data available. There's also opportunities to support the Institute for Museum and Library Services. They have a petition and ways to contact your senators and representatives to say that you're concerned about this stuff and want to see it protected. There's also the Data Rescue Project, which is a really great resource for a lot of this information. Our presentation was heavily inspired by them. They have a website that came from a Google Doc that a bunch of librarians were compiling information from, and they are doing a lot of really great work to track. So any rescue efforts that are happening, they have this great spreadsheet, and like it tracks the status of like whether it's actively being archived or has already been archived, and some really great stuff there, and a lot of backups. And then they also have a lot of resources for alternatives, and they list a bunch of library guides and stuff. But they also have these stories where they're sharing like how this is affecting people's research and their work. And if you're interested in sharing a story about your changes in access to public data use, or if you want to like learn about how other people have been affected, you can look through their stories as well. And then we have links to a bunch of different communities. So if you want to like learn what people are doing and maybe how to get involved, there's like Safeguarding Research Forum, which is a lot of like conversational stuff for people. And this Restored CDC Discord has some volunteer-based work that you can do if you're interested in getting involved in that sort of thing. So yeah, that's a bit about what you can be doing. And now we'd really like to hear from you.
Yeah, so we have been monitoring the situation and pulling together resources that from our perspective as librarians look like they'll be helpful, but we want to hear from you guys. Like, what do you need? What is helpful? How have your students been affected? How has your research or scholarly activity been affected? What are your concerns? And like, what are your data access needs? Are you concerned about retractions, and what resources have you been looking to for information that have been helpful? Or for news updates, and then just, any feedback you have on our research guide. Is it helpful how it's organized? Can we do anything to make things easier to find? There are some, like the U of M research guide is amazing. So we don't want to reinvent the wheel, but it's nice to have things like in a one-stop shop. So yeah, and Michelle, thank you again for mentioning GitHub. We will add that for sure. So yeah, we'll just open it up to questions and comments.
And I'll say that GitHub is one that I've seen a lot of people adding stuff to. So Internet Archive and GitHub are hosting a bunch of these projects. So when you get into like who's archiving and actually accessing the data sets, GitHub comes up quite a bit. Has anybody here had their data affected or data that you use? I see somebody's raising their hand, and I think you should, okay.
I didn't realize I was under Angie's name. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
It's
It's like a technical glitch. A lot of people are under Angie's name. Yeah, just introduce yourself. Go ahead.
Walter Grayson in the history department. The last 2 months, the big loss for the stuff that my students use is PBS connections and videos, particularly having to do with gender identity and sexual orientation and those kinds of questions. One of my big partners at the University of Richmond is the New American History group, and they've managed to preserve some of those video resources. But I didn't know if other folks were seeing similar kinds of loss of instructional education related material that not necessarily the government is taking down, but that private entities are removing, that makes the work you're doing harder. So that was the big one that came to top of mind. There's a few others, but that was the most egregious change that we're still struggling to cope with.
Yeah, and if there's any, I haven't seen as much about the history stuff, but if there's any like particular materials that you need access to, if you can get in touch with, I think either Jenny or Amelia is probably your instruction librarian. They can help you either like find alternative access through like ILL or anything like that. And there could be ways for us to get that stuff. But thank you for sharing.
Yeah, I didn't know about that. Anticipatory, I suppose. Julie, yeah, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you for putting all this together. This is super helpful. I want to follow up maybe on a question that sorry, lost my voice here for a second. It was just asked, I use ICPSR quite a bit, and I'm not teaching the methods class this semester. So to follow up on Walter's question about like places that have their own data, is there any indication that places like that, those kinds of data repositories, I'm guessing ICPSR gets some money from the federal government, but I don't know that for a fact. Is there anything happening in those venues?
As far as like I don't know if they're at risk per se, because they are at the University of Michigan, right? But I don't know if they're getting alternate funding. I know they are making a huge like effort to archive additional data, like at their biennial meeting that's coming up. I believe it's June 18th to 20th. They'll have opportunities for folks to participate in archiving. Like they're doing a lot, which is great, and they have a lot available. and that did occur to me, like, is anything at risk? Because they are funded by they are at a large institution, but I have not heard anything, but I'll let you know if
Great, thanks.
that's the case. That's a great question.
I'll also say that some of these resources are being very proactive in like
Mhm.
trying to counteract some of this. So like the Open Science Framework has published some statements about how they're actively taking on some more archival projects and stuff like that. And they're making space available for folks who want to archive their data there. So I think I'm not as familiar with like ICPSR. IPMS is doing some proactive stuff too, right, Shannon?
Yeah.
I was wondering if Luann and Catherine can tell us a little bit more about Dryad and why, why one might want to consider there in addition to or in place of others, or just some of the systems out there for people. I know they're in the guide, but just any top of mind things that people might want to know that you two want to share.
Sure, I'll jump in. So Dryad is a place to store open data, but it's also a service of curation and preservation. They have a preservation plan. So thinking about helping make data openly accessible, making sure that the metadata is there, that it can be well reused by others. That's part of the curation process that they offer. And then knowing that it will be accessible. Dryad is a platform that's interdisciplinary. There is a lot of more natural sciences kinds of works there, but they are accepting any kind of work that doesn't make more sense in a specialized subject area repository. And I'm happy to take any questions about it. Thanks for bringing up the screenshot.
And they do have, I'll highlight that they have curators, and you can contact them if you have any like questions or need to consult with them.
And if
just
anyone has more like discipline specific open repositories that you like, that you use, that you rely on yourself, we'd love to hear that as well.
And we're also looking at some subscription data set options. So I'll reiterate again, if there's like a data set that's behind a paywall that you'd really like access to, let us know and we can see about how that can fit into our collections and budget.
I was just going to add, which was said earlier, back to Dryad really quickly, we're members right now. So we can deposit freely. The pricing is changing. Luann shared with me recently, and based on a new model, which will increase our price to a point where we wouldn't be able to be members as far as I can discern, unless Luann has a different idea, or Catherine. Doesn't mean we still can't deposit. We'd pay more by the deposit, I believe, rather than have this subscription. But if this intrigues anybody or any of your colleagues, now's the time to get your data in and be part of this service. May I ask a question I probably should know the answer to, but can you deposit in multiple places for redundancy as well, or do they prefer that you deposit in one place?
Guess that's not anything I've thought about.
Yeah, I don't know the answer either, except that if it's an open repository, I can't imagine they would have an issue with you depositing it elsewhere, but
And I would also guess that maybe it depends on your author agreement. If this is published stuff, you might need to look into like where you're allowed to host it. Because some publishing agreements might restrict or like name some steps that you have to take when making it publicly available. But I'm not sure that like any of the repositories themselves are, I haven't heard of them limiting the ability to host based on where else it's published. But that's a good point about maybe trying to have backups and backups and backups. I've seen also a lot of people saying if you see something, save something. So I think the strategy right now is to save as much as possible and doing it on multiple repositories, I would say, is alignment with that strategy.
What have you guys heard from students, if anything?
I'm just going to was remembering the example I think that Brigid and Shannon, you both had about working with a statistics class and doing an assignment in class where you were using a data set that was there. And then the next session, the next section of the class, the data set wasn't there. And so students actually, I forget when that was exactly, but that just struck me as such a huge teachable moment for students to see that, oh, by the way, the previous class had this, but you don't.
Yeah, that was for Stats 155, one of Jed's classes Brigid and I did, and we were showing the CDC data, and we knew that things were happening, and then the whole CDC data website was down. So, but that definitely kind of engaged the students for sure.
If anybody does find that like their students are having issues or you are, I would encourage you to reach out to your liaison librarian, and even we've been doing some consults with students as well about finding data sets. So we're always happy to help people walk through different options for searching.
Yep, definitely.
Smaller things, these are more targeted, but my students are working in a couple different areas this semester. The one that the smallest group affected are the folks studying African history, because there just weren't as many biographical resources online for them to access. So we're doing a lot of work about pulling together from existing university research guides. But that's in this context, probably the smallest. The biggest one that the larger classes are finding, particularly my intro African American history, is the removal of the Department of Defense, anything labeled DEI that's through a federal agency that would give them kind of leads and pointers. And so the most notable one, I guess, over the weekend people were pointing out was the Jackie Robinson removal from DOD. And so that's the pieces that, we go through for a lot of my classes that give them a sense of how people outside of professional scholars write, but still are really valuable for engaging public. And so if there's any effort, I know there are a couple folks who do preservation work for 19th century. I guess people in my position didn't imagine we'd have to be doing 20th century preservation as aggressively. So that's something that we're still all adapting to.
Right.
Yeah, the one that comes to mind for me in that area is the Stonewall stuff where they're taking away any mention of trans rights.
Yeah.
Um,
And the Wayback Machine can be really helpful, especially if you're like you're like, I think there was something and this looks different. I'm not sure if it is. And then it's a great way to double check it.
Yeah, I did want to join the chorus and just thank you all for everything you do. And in my case, particularly, just so much of the work that I try to assign is not possible without efforts like this. And I'll be sharing the research guide because it's just tremendously important. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you for your feedback too. Actually, I had no idea about the PBS videos that were not available. That's really good to know about. Any other questions or thoughts to share? Brianna, if you're there, I might pick on you and ask if from the stats department if we're missing anything or you have any updates from your world.
Sorry, I'm a little sick. So my throat doesn't feel great. But no, like you covered a lot and I missed the first 10 minutes. So one question is, are those slides you made available anywhere else? Like, or so could refer to the beginning of them?
Yes.
we'll circulate them after this, and actually, I'll go ahead and add them to the guide as well.
Cool. No, I'm at the point where I just don't know what is not available, right? Until I get to that point of a class. But one thing the stats group did this summer was data sets that we use in our classes. We made an organization on GitHub and just host them all there. So that's like one place that we're archiving for ourselves, our pedagogical materials. But in the classes where I actually want them to engage with the original source, that's the trickier part where I did have a situation where I had a homework where I say, go to data.gov, look for this search term, download this file. And the one person who turned it in late, when they tried to go get the data set, it was not there.
Oh,
so I think things have been up and then down, and it's not always clear what is going on behind the scenes and like how much is the documentation of what's being changed is not always clear to me. So it's just a little overwhelming, I think, at the moment so I really appreciate all the work that you're doing in helping summarize the work that's been happening outside of Macalester and at Macalester. So thank you.
Yeah, it's a lot, and it's only been a couple months. Yeah, thank you for sharing too. I hope you feel better. Yeah, and Ali Scheinfeld, you mentioned the Internet Archive does capture the changes over time. So yeah, that's a really helpful way to kind of check stuff, but it can be, you have to already be there and kind of have something that triggers you to want to check it.
They also have the end of term archive, so it is the Internet Archive's end of term crawl has been happening since 2008 for each administration change. So there are like some standard archiving practices that are really helpful to be thinking about during this time. But yeah, the Wayback Machine is extremely helpful for tracking changes. I think we have some resources about using the Wayback Machine on the guide as well. It feels like this might be a good time to end unless anybody else has any last questions or comments or anything. Okay. Thank you all for being here. We really appreciate your engaging with this subject.
Yeah, absolutely.